Welcome to the Prospective Doctor podcast, brought to you by Med School Coach. Pre-med and medical students alike are encouraged to tune in each week for tips on how to become a strong med school candidate, gain acceptance into the school of your dreams, and succeed on your journey toward residency and becoming a doctor.
Hello, everyone. I'm super excited to have our special guest today, Dr. Shirag Shemmassian. I'm just going to have him take a little bit of time to introduce himself.
Hi, thanks for having me, Dr. DeRouen. So I help students get into medical school. That's the short of it. Been doing this work for nearly 20 years, and it's really just a treat to, help students, achieve their educational and career goals, as because students come to us at various points in their admissions processes where, some students just starting out in college and they're really looking forward to, understanding what courses they need to take or extracurriculars to participate in. And then other folks come in when it's time for MCAT prep or they really need to get their applications in. And so at every stage, just getting to know these students and understanding what drives them and helping them put together a great application.
That's awesome. And this is just the place for us to discuss this because we have a lot of pre-med listeners. So for everyone listening out there, please, when you listen, subscribe to the channel and also tell a friend about it. So we'll start by just going back, since you said you've been doing this for about 20 years, to talk about how did you start your mission of helping in the medical school admission space?
Yeah, it happened really organically. I mean, going way back, I went to a very small high school even where we didn't have very good college counseling. And, I always wanted to get into the best schools that I can get into. And so I, studied everything I could and achieved my own, success for myself with that process. And then when I was in undergrad, I was pre-med in undergrad and learning everything I could about that process. And just along the way, as I was having, admission success and helping other people, it sort of grew word of mouth. Sometimes I joke, I don't know any 8-year-olds who, when you ask them, what do you want to be when they grow up? No one tells me, oh, I want to be a med school consultant. It's not really something that, people think that they should do years in advance. It's really more so about, learning a lot about the process, helping people achieve tons of success. And, over time, people tell others, and now there's word of mouth. And, over some time too, I started producing resources on the web, to help, frankly, the students that I was supporting. And then others, were learning more and more over time. And then people started asking for more and more help. And as I, as they were going through the process and getting in, I was also enjoying it more and more. And over time, it just, this is something that I just really fell in love with increasingly over the years. And here I am today doing it full time.
That's awesome. And I think that it's a really necessary field as there are a lot of applicants and it's becoming more and more competitive. I have a few more detailed questions that I think that the listeners are dying to learn about.
Sure.
What aspect of the application process do you find that the students are finding the most difficult to navigate?
Yeah, it varies from student to student, of course. But I mean, we could talk about some common pitfalls, Dr. DeRouen, that I see. Number one common pitfall is students really obsessing over their personal statement, but not thinking about how it fits with other sections of their application. And I know we're going to talk about secondaries today, and this is going to be a primary area for our discussion. But I get a lot of people who ask me, I'm thinking about writing about this topic or that topic. What do you think? What's better? And nothing's objectively better or worse. I think that sometimes students aren't clear on what it is they're trying to communicate, not just through their personal statement, but also through the rest of their application. And so if you see the application as a bunch of disparate pieces that hopefully come together, you're not really going to put your best foot forward. So I think it's always wise for students to take a step back from the beginning and just really game plan the whole thing. Okay, what is it that I'm trying to communicate? What's going to be the best thing to talk about in my personal statement? Okay, how do I then talk about the day-to-day stuff I did in my work and activities? And then secondaries used for school-specific fit. So that's one big issue I see. Another one is people like obsessing too much about the date of submission. So sometimes people say I need to get it in on day one. When the application opens, not really understanding how the verification process works, or how, the date of your secondary submission is actually more important in a lot of ways than the primary, because that's when your full app is in. Or also that they shouldn't be sacrificing the quality of their application just to get it in faster. Because let's say your personal statement is 70% of what it could be, and in an extra week you can get it to 100% of what it could be. Well, that increase is going to be well worth it, because the quality of your application, good or bad, follows you through the whole thing. So if you submit poor quality materials, that's going to follow you. And if you submit high quality materials, that's going to follow you too. So being just very deliberate and thoughtful about your submitting. I think those are really the two areas that hinder a lot of folks. And then of course, secondaries are also a big thing where you get bombarded. I don't think students really understand sometimes the avalanche of secondaries. And so not understanding how important it is to pre-write, or also how to produce great materials really, really quickly to get it in by that within 2 weeks goal per school. So it's hard because sometimes people will have, again, subpar materials, but they're like, I must submit it at the 2-week mark, or maybe they have good enough materials, but they don't know it, and they think, well, if I only take another week and just really refine because it's my top school or whatever, when it's already 95% of what it'll ever be, and maybe the incremental benefit might not be worth it. So those are the kinds of decisions we help our students make, in addition to actually assisting them with that editing process.
That makes perfect sense, because it's a package, and then you have to strategically plan on how complete your package is and what components are in there, and how sometimes rushing may hinder you when you can take a few more days or another week if you have that amount of time left to make it a little better. So we started mentioning secondaries. And for the listeners out there who may be super early in their process of researching these things, can you just give a little quick one-liner on what the difference between a primary application is and what a secondary application is?
Yeah, for sure. So the primary application is sort of the central application system. And we say primaries really to mean, the various primary application options that a student might have. So AMCAS is the primary application for MD programs in the US. ACOMIS is the DO application system. And then of course, Texas has TMD SAS. And then, if you're in Canada, there's also the Ontario one, OMSAS. But most people, when they talk about primaries, they're thinking AMCAS and ACOMIS for MD and DO programs, respectively. And essentially, this is where you write your personal statement and your activities section, and you indicate which schools you want your application to go to. And you enter, your demographics and your MCAT and what courses you took and all this good stuff. And then what ends up happening is that your primary application is sent to the individual schools on your list. And then those schools in turn will send you their secondary application. So a secondary application is sometimes known as a supplemental application. It's essentially the school-specific application where pretty much every school will have additional questions they want you to answer. Questions like, why do you want to come to our school? Or how will you contribute to the diversity of our medical school? Or, describe the largest adversity you've ever faced, what you learned from it. Or what are you going to do during your gap year? These kinds of questions are what typically come up.
Thank you so much. I think that provided a lot of clarity for people. And since we started to talk about the different types of essays, and you kind of hit on a few of the more common ones that are asked in secondaries, can you tell us what you think makes a difference between a good essay and a great essay?
Yeah, sure. So a good essay is one that, answers the question personally and, demonstrates knowledge of the school and, some fit with the school. I think a great essay has two primary components. Number one, it demonstrates an exceptional sense of fit with the school. And the second aspect of it is it branches off very neatly from the primaries. So I can talk about those 2 points a little bit more. So as far as demonstrates fit with the school, here's a pretty good way to do it, which is what I see in most cases, where, students will review the website of a school and, they'll say, oh, I looked on the, Maryland site and, they talk a lot about X, Y, and Z. They have, this and that program. And so, I want to talk about how I want to pursue this program when I go to Maryland, maybe talk a little bit about what I've did that's related to it. But it doesn't really, it's the kind of essay where most people who have decent writing skills, if they review the website, can produce something like that. So it ends up being something where the student is telling the person or telling the school about the school, yet the school knows about the school, if that makes sense, right? So it would be like walking up to someone with dark hair who's wearing, a red t-shirt and blue shoes and saying, you have dark hair, you're wearing a red t-shirt, you have blue shoes. So it's like, great, like you took the time to acknowledge what they offer and you recognize those things, but it's not necessarily talking about why you there, right? So if you compare that with an exceptional essay, it's a little bit more like, sometimes I joke, it's sort of like a romantic courtship, right? If somebody asks you, hey, why do you want to be with me? And you say, well, you do this for me, you do that for me, you look this way, and you make me feel this way. Well, that's a little bit too much about what's in it for you versus talking about, well, I see us together because we bring the best in each other. When I'm with you, this is what I experience. And I think that you experience certain things with me. It's just that together, we're much better. Or something like that, right? So not only talking about what they offer, but what you've done in that space and how you're going to, use their resources as a springboard to do greater work and how you're going to actually contribute to their program. I think that's really critical when describing fit. So that's a big, big piece. And then the second thing I brought up initially, Dr. Rowan, when answering the question, is making sure that it branches off really neatly from your primary application. So let's say that your primary application was all about community involvement, commitment to serving, diverse populations and your experience doing so and all that kind of stuff. With your secondaries, it's great if you can take that and just really drill that point home. So essentially the message you want to communicate is, hey, how I've talked about all this stuff about community involvement. Well, your school is the ideal next place for me to do that because of XYZ opportunities. It's still related to that fit thing. But it's really nice when there's a cohesive narrative. So sometimes, let's say a student, is just all about academic medicine and applying translational research to help certain people, and they've taken their in-person work to inform their research work, whatever. And then all of a sudden their secondaries are completely out of left field. It might still be a solid essay in terms of fit, but it's a little bit disjointed. And so you want to make sure that it's not very jarring. And obviously it doesn't have to just be related to personal statement stuff that you want to fit. It could have been stuff that came up in your most meaningful sections on the work and activities or the personal statement. But so long as there's some cohesiveness, I think that's going to serve you really well.
That makes a good point. Like you're telling your story and how you be an asset to the school. And I loved how you gave the earlier analogy about courtship, whereas of course the school is phenomenal and you want to go there to learn and become a doctor, but you also have great qualities and what can you bring and not just what they can bring to you. So I definitely love that tidbit for the students.
At Med School Coach, we know that getting into medical school is hard. In fact, 60% of pre-meds who apply to medical school don't even get accepted. And if you want to get accepted into a top medical school, it's even harder. It's a complicated process, and even students with great grades and MCAT scores get left out. That's why more students than ever are turning to Med School Coach for admissions advising. Our advisors are all physicians and former admissions committee members, so they know exactly what medical schools are looking for. One-on-one admissions advising from Med School Coach makes all the difference. Our expert team will help you develop a game plan, prepare your application, edit your essays, and coach you for interviews. Every pre-med has a story, and we'll help you tell it so you can stand out from the crowd. Visit us online at medschoolcoach.com and use offer code PODCAST10 to save 10% up to $400 on a Med School Coach admissions advising package. You can achieve your medical school dreams, and Med School Coach can help.
What things should students definitely avoid including in their essays?
Boy, I guess it really depends on the specific student. And again, going back to what it is that they want to communicate at a high level. I find a lot of times, Dr. DeRouen, that a student's confusion comes from a lack of clarity, right? So when they're staring at the blank page, so to speak, and they're like, what do I write here? It's because they don't really know what message they're trying to send. So it's usually when someone says, oh, I don't know what topic to write about, it's because they don't have clarity about the whole application narrative. So that's a big thing. Some things not to write about. Well, I think this comes up a lot during the challenge essay, where students are like, they think about the biggest adversity they faced. And so, if they've lived, relatively smooth lives or privileged lives or something like that, they might think they have nothing to write about, right? Where, I grew up, with means. We weren't poor. I didn't have some disability. I didn't, all this kind of stuff. And then so they think that, well, I have nothing really to write about. So sometimes they stretch, or sometimes they use the opportunity to get defensive. So let's say, for instance, that they had a rougher go freshman year of college. This comes up all the time. You're sort of a rock star in high school and you get to college and you have a rude awakening where you might not be the valedictorian anymore or in the top 5% of your school. And you get a couple B's, maybe you get a C. And so sometimes students say like, oh, biggest adversity, like, I don't know if it's good enough, but I really want to, talk about this because I did have an upward trend afterwards and all this kind of stuff. And then I ask, well, what would you actually say about it? And they're like, well, that, I struggled to juggle all my work, but I've improved and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, so, but what exactly? So it's almost like an opportunity to try and explain away stuff or to say like, no, don't look at that. I promise I'm better today and all this kind of stuff, except we are already seeing it in the transcript, right? We're seeing the trend already. And if there's no sort of acute reason, like let's say your grandmother unfortunately passed away the first term of undergrad and there's an acute reason associated with the drop in grades or something like that, then you probably don't want to, draw extra light to it. Or sometimes people say, sophomore year, I really struggled and, all this kind of stuff. But well, okay, was there an acute reason? If not, you probably don't want to talk about it. You're drawing, negative attention. Other stuff is, stretching. Is not a good thing. Let's say you haven't had a ton of experience working with, diverse populations and you're sort of anxious about it because maybe you're not part of an underrepresented minority either, or whatever the case might be. And so like your diversity essay might really fall on deaf ears. So you just have to be really mindful of the way you might perceive based on your background. I think those are when I think about what not to write about, or, adversity, if there's something you actually did that was really problematic. Let's say let's say you, punch someone in the face once, you don't want to, right? Like there are things that you might not want to disclose, right? So sometimes, students will say, well, I just wanted to be honest. And, if medical schools can't see through that, then, I don't want to go there anywhere. So I'm like, well, you also don't want to cast a negative light on yourself, right? So it's always important to be thoughtful. Okay, if somebody didn't know you at all and they learned this about you and they don't have a context, they haven't met you in person, is this something that's going to be beneficial to you or not? And if the answer is not, then maybe not. Now, that said, if you've experienced something and you're able to thoughtfully discuss how you've worked through it, what perspective it's given you, so long as it's not too damning, it would be okay. So there's always that fine line you got to walk.
That makes total sense because like you mentioned earlier, you have to think about your complete package. And for a lot of people, for everyone actually, until they offer you the interview, this is the first glimpse of you that they're seeing. Yeah. So of course you want to stand out and set yourself apart, but you don't want to do that in a negative manner. So definitely taking the time to actually think through how you want to represent yourself in this package is very important. My question now kind of hits on what you were mentioning earlier about sometimes people may struggle to figure out those certain topics to cover, like diversity or adversity and things like that, if they can't necessarily find something they feel is more meaningful for that. How would you suggest that they kind of brainstorm or figure out something that would be reasonable to write about?
Yeah. I think the diversity prompt is really critical to cover here, because this is where I think so many students get tripped up. There are two big mistakes I see students make here. Number one is they group all diversity prompts together, right? Thinking that if I see the word diversity in the prompt, that means it's the same diversity prompt as all the others. Big mistake. Let me give you an example. Some prompts might ask a question about, describe your experiences working with diverse populations. Another one will say, how do you believe you will contribute to the diversity of our school? Those two prompts include the words diverse or diversity, but they are completely different questions. So answering the same way would be a big error, right? So for the initial one, you'd want to talk about actually your experiences working with diverse populations in a clinical or service setting. In the latter, it's about what do you bring to the table that might be different. How are you going to enrich the student? But those are two different questions. But if you treat them all as a quote unquote, catch-all diversity prompt, well, then I think you're going to get into trouble, right? So actually read the question and, think about that. The second piece, I think, where a lot of students struggle is that they assume or that they consider diversity with a very narrow lens, right? Some people will say, well, I'm not part of an underrepresented group when it comes to race or ethnicity. I don't have, I didn't grow up with low income. I am, I have a, heterosexual sexual orientation and stuff like this. So I'm not quote unquote diverse enough, as though that means, and the word's diverse enough as though that means anything, right? If you grew up in a part of the world where it's all it's all one group of people, in that setting, that might be the majority. In another setting, individuals from that group might be a minority. So having a much wider, lens of what it means to be diverse and working with diverse populations and the benefit of those things, I think is really, really critical. So, I get this a lot from students, who are white applicants or Asian applicants or whatever the case might be, folks who aren't traditionally underrepresented in medicine. They think, well, like I'm going to sound tone deaf if I write about my experiences, except not, right? So talk about actually in your clinical and service settings and all that kind of stuff. Like, how did you actually interact with people who are different than you? It's not a competition of who has worked with the most folks from underrepresented minority backgrounds, but the way you've approached it, the thoughtfulness, going into certain interactions, what you hadn't considered, what you learned from your patients, how you've taken those learnings and applied them in different settings, because that's really what it is, right? It's not like, I'm Armenian American, so I'll just use my example. Let's say there was someone who, I don't know, it's from a completely different background, and they've had interactions with one Armenian American patient. That patient doesn't represent all Armenian American patients. The same way working with one, Black patient doesn't represent, the experience you will have working with all Black patients. But if you oversimplify and distill it like that, you're gonna look tone deaf. Mm-hmm. So it's important to talk about the experience and draw from that the learnings you're going to apply elsewhere. So maybe when you work with the Armenian American patient, maybe you consider there was something about, I don't know, how their family was highly involved and how the patient wanted grandma to be in there with them and did consider stuff from the, advice from their mother, even though maybe it didn't jive with the medical advice you had in mind or something like that. How did you navigate that? What kinds of questions did you ask? How did you ask them to I guess, teach you or instruct you about how things work within their community? How did you apply that to deliver the right care? But then don't overgeneralize and essentially communicate, well, when working with Armenians, this is what I have to do. No, it's not like that. It's basically when working with someone whose background or context or whatever I don't understand, these are the kinds of things I will have to do to be the most effective physician, right? So it doesn't matter whether you yourself are a part of an ethnic minority group. It's more so, do you have the social wherewithal? Do you have the insight to recognize that you are different from the other person, that you don't have the same lens and knowledge that they do? And how are you closing that gap, that knowledge gap, by considering their perspective, by asking the right questions? And how are you going to take that framework to work with people across different groups? So for instance, if you have a lot of experience working with, patients who are Armenian or Korean or Indian or whatever, it's not like you're going to be frozen in your tracks if you now see a patient who is Mexican, right? You're going to apply a certain framework for working with people who are different than you. And you have to demonstrate in your writing how you have done that in the past and how you're going to take your learnings into the future. So I realized that was a bit of a dense answer, but I hope it clarifies the difference between an okay essay and a great one.
No, it makes perfect sense. So everyone who is applying is unique and have their own unique experiences. And it's not about comparison of who had it worse or what experiences you didn't have, but trying to figure out how you can display what types of character traits that you have to serve people from all backgrounds.
Excellent point.
At Med School Coach, we know that studying for the MCAT exam can be challenging, especially for busy students on the go. That's why our team created MCAT Prep, the only all-encompassing study app built specifically for the MCAT. MCAT Prep by Med School Coach provides student access to extremely high-quality content and a personalized curriculum for free. The app has more than 250 videos, 1,000 flashcards, and 1,000 unique MCAT questions. Plus, MCAT Prep by Med School Coach allows students to create a personalized study schedule and track progress over time. You need every competitive advantage you can get to get into medical school, and now you can put the experts from Med School Coach into your pocket. It's the closest pre-med students can come to a personal tutor without spending a penny. Download MCAT Prep by Med School Coach for free at medschoolcoach.com/MCAT. Or download it directly from the Apple Store or Google Play Store. You can achieve your medical school dreams, and MCAT Prep by Med School Coach can help.
That's great. So my final big question for you is one that someone wrote as in, should I even write the optional "what else would you like to know about you" essay? Are optional essays really optional?
Yeah, so there are great question. Whoever submitted that, really, it depends. Okay. Again, I don't group all optional essays together because there will be some schools that ask an optional essay and make it very clear that it's truly optional. They might even tell you most students shouldn't submit that essay, or that most students don't. In other words, they're saying, hey, look, don't stretch. We're warning you. Don't write something just to write something, all that kind of stuff. Now, most schools won't give you the, big warning in red letters like that. But rather, they'll say, what else do you think we should know about you? Okay. In those cases, I think it's worthwhile for most students to submit something if there's something meaningful for them to share. So again, if let's say you had the lower grades freshman year or something like that, and it's just because you were having some difficulty acclimating to the college environment, not a good thing to write in the optional essay. But let's say that there's something really critical to understanding who you are and how that's impacted you, and it's impacted your lens on medicine and your path to medicine. That would be an excellent place to write that. So I'll give you an example, like from me personally. So I have Tourette syndrome. It's something that I've had since, 8 or 9 years old, somewhere around there. And let's say I had not covered that in my personal statement. And now there was an optional essay of, is there anything else you'd like us to know? That would be the perfect place to write about that. Now, someone listening to this might, again, their mind might go to, well, I don't have anything like that. Again, I don't have a disability. I don't have this. I don't have that. Well, what else? The question you got to ask yourself is, what's not on your resume and what have you not covered elsewhere that is critical to getting to know you? I think that's really important to share. Now, a school might ask an adversity question and then have the what else do you want us to know about you? And maybe you have an excellent diversity draft from another secondary application. And working with diverse populations has actually been incredibly important to you. And you didn't go too deep into it in your personal statement. Well, this might be a good time for you to send a modified version of that diversity essay. So I think it's on a case-by-case basis based on how explicit the school is about, maybe you shouldn't submit this, maybe you should, that kind of thing. But also what else you've written in your primaries and also your secondaries for that school and what you didn't write yet for that school. And then consider your options from there. But I would say for most students, in most cases, probably worthwhile to submit something if the quality is good enough. Again, you'll hear me say this all the time. Never, never, never sacrifice quality. Doesn't matter.
I love that. And you have given us so many different pearls of wisdom that I think will benefit a lot of individuals. I would like for you to just give a shameless plug as to how students who want to learn more can reach out to you and your organization.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Just going on the web, shemmassianconsulting.com. It's easy to find, contact forms there. But really, if folks are looking for resources on, any of the topics we talked about, personal statements, secondaries, all that stuff, just type it in Google, med school secondary essays, Shemmassian, and, there'll be a useful resource in there. I can also provide a link that, you can plug in the show notes. And yeah, if anyone ever has questions, contact at shemmassianconsulting.com. It would be a treat to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. And we'll definitely post the link in our show notes. And I'll just give you an opportunity to say goodbye.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Dr. DeRouen, and best of luck to everybody listening to this and everybody else who's not.
Thanks, everyone. Be sure to click that subscribe button, and I'll be back next week with another guest. Have a great day.
Each episode of the Prospective Doctor podcast is brought to you by Med School Coach. To access articles, videos, webinars, and free tools to help you succeed on your journey toward med school and beyond, visit our website, prospectivedoctor.com. We hope you tune in again next time.